fell on me. Oh no, you gotta help me, please. Come on, help me now.
Jeg hedder Jørgensen Gullach, og jeg er forkvinde for Adoptionspolitisk Forum. Og nogle af de ting, eller en af grundene til, at I er her, det er jo blandt andet, at det overskud, der kommer af den her fantastiske koncert, den går til ACT, det er Against Child Trafficking, den går til 30+, som er et socialt forum for voksenadopterede, og så går den til Adoptionspolitisk Forum, som er en politisk forening, der forsøger at forbedre vilkår for adoption i Danmark. Først og fremmest så vil jeg sige tak og tillykke til projekt Planet Love for at have skabt den her fantastiske arrangement. Og så vil jeg jo så sige dernæst, at I skal nyde musikken. Det er først og fremmest derfor, I er her. I skal nyde de smukke omgivelser, og det er jo ret symbolsk, at vi er i Planetariets kuppelsal. En af de steder, eller en af de grundspørgsmål, som Planetariet jo forsøger at besvare, det er jo spørgsmål omkring, hvem er jeg, og hvor stammer jeg fra? Og det kobler sig blandt andet til adoption, og jeg vil sige, at adopteret i Danmark, og især transnationalt adopteret i Danmark, er jo nok den største skjulte migrationsgruppe, der findes. Og en af de ting, som vi arbejder på, det er at sikre, at transnationale adopterede har nogle helt basale menneskerettigheder. For en af de ting, der er, det er, at i FN's børnekonvention er det blandt andet tilkendegjort, at adopterede og alle børn derudover har retten til at kende ophav. Og problemet er blandt andet for transnationale adopterede, at de ejer ikke retten til egne filer, de ejer ikke retten til at bevare kontakt til oprindelige forældre, og de ejer i virkeligheden ikke retten til at have en fast forbindelse til det ophav og den kultur, de kommer fra. Så det er blandt andet det, som vi vil holde en konference om. Vi vil holde en konference senere på året, hvor alle jer, der har købt en billet til den her fantastiske koncert, har fortrinsret til at komme. Så jeg vil håbe, at vi kommer også og høre omkring FN's børnekonvention og transnational adoption. Og vi vil annoncere det på Planet Loves side på Facebook. Så det handler bare om at troppe op, når den kommer senere på året. Så vil jeg egentlig, og nu tror jeg faktisk, hun er blevet væk, jeg vil jo egentlig gerne sige en personlig tak til powerkvinden bag det hele, Metta. Er Metta her? Nej. Det er hun ikke. Nå, men så er der en buket blomster til hende senere. Men derfor, selvom hun ikke er her, så vil jeg gerne sige tak til Metta, som fuldstændig energisk, utrætteligt og med en usædvanlig fokus og dynamik har formået at stable hele det her event på benene. Det er faktisk hende, der er årsag til og skyld i og grund til, at vi i dag kan sidde her så mange mennesker og nyde det her fantastiske koncert, der kommer. Så jeg synes, vi skal give hende en hånd, også selvom hun ikke er her. I would like to say welcome to all of you for being here. I would like to ask Metta, the woman behind all of this, to make an introduction and a welcome.
We are being confronted with a lot of different articles and a lot of different revelations at this time. Things that we as organizations already knew, but things that are coming to a public eye now, grand revelations of horrible injustice. I myself have been quite confused and disturbed lately because of these revelations, and it leads me into an emotion of not really knowing how I got here, how I ended up doing this. And I have this feeling, did I arrive in a spaceship, or did I arrive in a card box, or where did I really come from? But the fact is that I'm very happy to represent the organizations, and that will keep me grounded for the moment. There are 3 organizations behind this event today. They all received the donations from our support concert, and the first is the Forum for Adoption Politics. It is an organization that works with a great emphasis on the intellectual and political aspect of adoption, as it is being practiced in Denmark today. The organization has been represented at the border, the Ankestyrelsen dialogue meetings, where the tribute is based on authentic experience and expert opinion. The organization says about themselves, the voice of adoptees should become an equal part in the formulation of adoption-related policies. And this organization in particular is often quoted in the medias for their radical reform of the system of transnational adoption towards rightful fundamental requirements. Another organization which is here today is represented by Christina Råhauge and Anke Herlev. The organization is called Adoptees 30+. And this organization has a strong focus on creating a sense of belonging and dialogue for both Danish adoptees and transnational adoptees. This goes on in a series of meetings in cafes in both Jylland and in Copenhagen, and has formed this organization which also represents local meetings and a Facebook community. It's a community that is open for debate and dialogues about the most common and intimate aspects of being an adoptee. The third organization behind this symposium is Against Child Trafficking. Against Child Trafficking is represented by Jean Vilsgaard in Copenhagen and Arun Dohle, who is seated in Germany. It's called ACT, an international children's rights organization working towards the commercialization of children, especially in the market for children transnational adoption. ACT is working to full implementation of the UN Children's Convention, which primarily gives children the right to be cared for by their parents. Naming a planet is still entertainment. It's much harder to name a child. This is where the real challenges starts, and this is why we are here today. I want to present myself. My name is Andong Kim. I have to rephrase that. My name is Jerry Kim. I'm sorry. My name is Mette Kim Dibbel, or at least it was for a year. No. My name is Mette Kim Jørgensen. Okay. Never mind. My name is Metta Kim Carter. And which one of these names that really carries any truth about who I am is and will still be a mystery to me. One thing I do know is that I was born to be among hundreds of mixed-race children that was despited, abused, and deported out of South Korea. I see all of us children like little ships at sea, down the river of what today is one of the world's largest industries, and we call it adoption. The largest industry, but also the largest illusion. A grand deception and a devastating corruption when it comes to the handling of a human life. The Danish government state, this is the biggest dilemma in Danish politics. Well, I'm not a politician. I'm a woman. I'm a mother, and I am a humanist. And you have lost me right here, because I don't see any dilemma. And I will have to ask, how can the welfare of a child ever become a dilemma? To my understanding, there is no dilemma at all. All that is left is demands. Demands according to already existing laws and directives regarding the welfare of children. Demands and obligation, financial compensation for loss of my name, my country, my family, my mother, my father, my religion, my historical and cultural inheritance, my medical reports, my safety, my belongings, my peace of mind, all of my rights. Oh, now I see one of our American musicians, glazed. It's really strange, I never saw this before, I never saw it in this way, but the transnational adoptees are psychologically suppressed in the exact same ways as the American slaves. So what the Danish politicians are calling a dilemma will be a dilemma to them only, because you would never hurt your property. You would never damage your own property. So how could they ever understand the agony of a transnational adoptee? This is when we are reaching the core. Property. I have to say thank you. The core, because this is the very reason that we are here today, because who really belong to who, and how, and what. The reason that I'm here today is because a biological mother who lost her child to adoption asked for my help to create a conference. Why am I here? It's because this is who I am. And by being here, I can become who I am supposed to be. Well, all I know is that I may have come out of a box. I'm a singer. So I volunteered to create this support and aid concert that would lead to exactly this conference. So I can only conclude that this is who I am, a human rights fighter, alongside all of you who also decided to be human rights fighters. I would call it revolutionaries, because we are doing pioneer work. So before we even start, I would hope that you would all rise and give a very big hand to this brave transnational adoptees who still got the power and the determination as strong as an American freedom rider. A freedom rider that will not be suppressed for another second of their lives, and whose future life condition and life quality will be based on the justice and legal rights that we are about to present here today.
The navigator, I'll be following the North Star. In love with hip hop and believe I'm gonna get far. I'm doing this through the brief and the straight, the stage and the mic. That's all I need to do this shit right. The navigator, I'll be following the North Star. In love with hip hop and believe I'm gonna get far. I'm doing this through the grief and the strife, the stage and the mic. That's all I need to do this shit right. Waking up in the morning, remember to count your blessing. Got some time for confession, cause the guilt will get yourself killed. It's suicidal, the time to lay about idle. So the party of bullshit, I lay it aside. And I try to survive, but the mic skills and lyricism, that to me be the realest living. I'm on a quest to become my own boss. With a tenant way back, but my soul would have been the cost. And that's the price I wasn't willing to pay to the piper. The love of feel busting off the top of the dome. Over beats in the cipher, it's something I can never sell to a culture vulture. No matter what kind of lies they sell, ain't the kind to be leaving a legacy of how I fell. So go ahead and say that I'm generic. I pencil my bars with illuminated scriptures of a cleric. I got that like Moorish heritage. Rather go a lifetime as a celibate than never have a mic to spit, bars to spit. Manifesting on the realest of shit. Through the hardest times in my life, the instinct to write brought me through the darkest of night to the soothing of the dawn light. To where a fly instrumental and inspire me. Connect with every patterns that can ever tie me. Kind of songs that this soft form, a rhythm of poetry. Can't compromise, homie. Fuck you, some other ghetto source. See, I'd rather do me. I understand finally when I bring you in the fire. That's what people want to see.
The topic that I'm talking about today is international adoptions, and from the child perspective, from the perspective of the children. How are they included? How do we see them? How do we look upon them within a legal framing? Okay, if we look into the concept or the phenomenon of an adoption, it's an old legal construction. It has hundreds of years in its history, and more or less it looks the same as it did 100 years ago. It is, in its basic, it is a legal construction of a permanent child-parent relationship. That is an adoption. It is a legal construction, and we create a permanent relationship between a child and an adult. If we look deeper into the adoption construction, it is legally framed as an adult construction. The perspective inherent in the adoption system and the concept of adoption is actually always the adult perspective. Yes, of course, we always talk about the best interest of the child, and we can only provide an adoption if it is for the best interest of the child. But who is to decide that? And that's never the child, never the children, it is always the grown-ups. So from my perspective, I find it of interest, and I think it's a legal interesting topic, to see how we can integrate children's rights in adoptions, in the phenomenon, in the legal construction of an adoption. And what I find of particular interest is the children's right to self-determination, their right to identity, history, non-discrimination, private life, and etc. In my opinion, where I see that we can get something, it's not from the Child Rights Convention. I don't think that the Child Rights Convention is actually a convention that is supporting the rights of the children. To a large extent, I think actually that the Child Rights Convention is outdated. It talks a lot about protection of children. It talks about the best interest of children, but always from the perspective of the adults. Where I see the real potential when we talk about children's rights is actually from the European Convention on Human Rights, and in particular because there is a court attached to this convention, making sure that the provisions in the convention is implemented and enforced in the different member states. So what is adoption about? Well, that goes for all kinds of adoptions, stepchild adoptions, forced adoptions, international adoptions. They all have the same purpose. It secures a family for all children. We cannot think about children outside a family structure, outside the structure of parenthood. Not necessarily a biological parenthood, but a parenthood as such. And actually, I find it very interesting sometimes to compare the adoption or the legal relationship, the parenthood, which is a legal construction between a child and its parents. Adoptions is the construction between an adopted child and adoptive parents. It is legally the same as a marriage. It's a legal agreement defining the legal relationships between two persons. 100 years ago, we could not think about women outside the marriage. Still today, we cannot think about children outside a parenthood or a family structure. I find that very interesting, and I will get back to that. But I think that is very fundamental when we think about and when we talk about adoptions, that each and every child should be provided with a family. That's the basic understanding of adoptions. And even though, as I said, that adoption is actually an adult construction, we like to think about it as something that we do for the children. I have taken a quote from the European Court of Human Rights, which is saying, adoption means providing a child with a family, not a family with a child. I think that is nonsense, which I will also come back to. As I mentioned, an adoption is a legal agreement between two parties. The child is party to the agreement, not subject to the agreement. The child is not a good, it is a party to the contract actually. And a consent is the legal prerequisite for each and every agreement, also for an adoption agreement. An adoption is a mutual agreement. And as for any agreement, the consent is a prerequisite for the validity of the agreement. So how is children then placed within that legal context? Do we need the consent of the child for an adoption? Well, it is the legal construction is actually such that that the biological parents, they consent on behalf of their children. The child's consent is not necessary for a valid adoption agreement. Then there is, in most countries, some limits for when we require then children to give their consent to an adoption. In Denmark, it's 12 years. But that varies across different countries. When we look at the international human rights framework around this issue, when we look into the Child Rights Convention, Article 21, it states that the persons concerned must give their informed consent to the adoption on the basis of such a counseling as may be necessary. Who are the persons concerned? Well, often it is only required to be the adoptive parents and the biological parents, but actually we could interpret this convention as also that the child's consent is also a necessity, but we don't. So when we look at those requirements of consent in international adoption setting, then the fact is that most of the children that are being adopted internationally or cross borders is under the age of 12 or 14. They are very young children. So in that way, the consent of the children are never required. So even though the convention specifically targeted at international adoptions require the consent of the children, it becomes irrelevant because the whole setting of international adoptions is that the children are very small. It is actually a part of the institution of adoption that it is possible to make an adoption agreement with full legal effects without the child's expressed consent to the agreement. Only the consent of the biological parents or by authorities can be sufficient for a valid adoption agreement. And I think actually that is very interesting. And I think also, it could be discussed, is that actually in compliance with the Child Rights Convention, which is actually stating that the persons concerned must give their informed consent. That, to me, is also the children. Also, legally, or from a human rights perspective, we can actually talk about international adoption as a condition of life. We know that the history, the identity, the genetic relationship, and so on, just like Metta just described just before, it is part of each and every individual, and that identity is actually protected in a human rights setting as the protection of private life. How can we actually think about adoption and children's rights, or children as having a legal standing in their own adoption case? Well, we see not only in this area of law, but we see in general that there are and actually an increased focus on children as right bearers in their own rights, that children in other settings actually are gaining more and more rights. We see that that's a general legal trend. Only when we look into the adoption area, we cannot see the same. When we think about or talk about adoptions, it goes into the question of children's right to self-determination. It's about private life, as I said, identity, non-discrimination, and also I think when we talk about international adoption, actually, the discrimination issue at stake here could be framed as an issue of discrimination on grounds of ethnicity, but and more pertinent in a way, I think this is a question of discrimination on grounds of social origin. It is typically children from poor families. It is clearly a question of social origin in the case of how well off are those families who have in some way or the other placed a child for adoption. So I think if we look into I think that the way to go forward legally is to insist that children have rights, and how can we go about this in an adoption setting? I think it's not impossible. I think that will demand some changes, and I think that we have to revise also what we perceive of as the best upbringing for a child.
The eagle guards you by day, the owl haunts you at night, the all-seeing eyes are watching you. Pyramids built stone by stone, human beings made glow by glow. We are the masters of the universe. We are paranormal. We are paranormal. We are paranormal. And the lights rise in our
I'm so glad about your presentation, Stine, because it's really, I think, something we should debate, because I obviously don't feel the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is outdated. Against child trafficking is also a very fake construction. It relates to the case you showed, Pini. Actually, I'm very sad to say that instead of me speaking, I would have appreciated my former colleague speaking. And she was flown there to that case by helicopter by Yong, who runs the children's home in which the children were staying. And everything relates back, which is now debated in Denmark and was debated in the Netherlands a few years back, dates back to the time of Romania's accession. And my colleague was the task manager who reformed the child protection system in Romania. And we together set up ACT. And ACT was a legal construction to park a civil servant or to get rid of a civil servant of the European Commission. And today, as I speak, she is on sick leave because the European Commission really doesn't really treat her well. And you know, the issue of children's rights and inter-country adoption, and adoption was in Europe in the first time debated during Romania's accession. There is a book, it's called Romania for Export Only, which is essentially her diary, which she wrote during that time. And after she published that book, ACT was set up on instruction of one of the most powerful people in Europe. It's Catherine Day, who was the Secretary General of the European Commission until a few weeks ago. And the new Secretary General of the European Commission, Alexander Italianer, I have his file, he was also working on this. So this is something, you know, which is still very hotly debated. And the so-called subsidiarity principle, sorry, if you don't understand, I just throw it out in the room for a later debate, was also debated in the last Hague Special Commission meeting. One of the things in law which I go wrong, I think that we mix up public law and private law, family law is also, or civil law. Because adoption is just a civil law thing, it's a private law thing, you called it contract. Well, actually, it's a very complex legal matter. But It is, I think. And the issue of child rights is public law or public law, I mean, between individuals and the states. And these questions were debated very heavily during Romania's accession. And once and for all, I think, decided, but, well, I agree the European Court of Human Rights has something else to say to this by now. The European Court of Human Rights, I went to the European Court of Human Rights with an Indian family on a case I worked on, whose child was kidnapped. And I can tell you, I took them there, and I personally fought this case for a long time. And for me, the biggest shocker is that they were not even heard by the court. The case was just dismissed. After Mercy was screened here in Denmark, I knew I have the resources, I mean the human resources to do this, to take up these cases. I took up Masho's case, or more precisely, the case of Sinkinesh and Hussein, and the case of Amy. And you know, while traveling to Sinkinesh and Hussein, I met Amy's mother, or Tigist's mother, Janet, and we started assisting her revoking the adoption in Ethiopia, to bring it later also further in Denmark. The same we started with Sinkinesh and Hussein, trying to revoke the adoption. We started this court case in Ethiopia, and we brought Amy's mother here. We brought Amy's mother Janet to meet the minister here. We brought her to meet the commune, and of course see how Amy is living and how she's treated by her foster family. And we stayed all there in the house, and everybody wishes the same. So Janet's wish is that Amy, and possibly also Isabella, lives with the foster family. Amy's wish seems to be like that. Of course, our organizational wish is also like that. And there's absolutely no question that anybody keeps her forcibly ever in Ethiopia. The commune tried to organize, good, very good, they tried to organize the trip to Ethiopia, and last year they canceled this trip suddenly by saying, we can't let her go to Ethiopia because Janet, the mother, may keep her, or the relatives may keep her forcibly in Ethiopia. The commune also hired a lawyer, an Ethiopian lawyer, and who wrote that Ethiopia is a terrible country and blah, 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 and it's, she can be kept forcibly there and she will, you know, almost literally die, he wrote. And after that, Ankestyrelsen decided Amy cannot travel to Ethiopia until she's 18. What we had is the adoptive families, it's in Marshal's case as well, the adoptive families have been summoned by the court, and the children also. So the children, Masho and Amy, have been summoned by the court. So these summons from the court cannot be delivered to Denmark, to Danish authorities. They just never reached. So we made sure they were again reissued. And since the formal way didn't work for whatever reasons, which I will show, these summons, I got a certified copy, and we delivered them to the foster family and to the commune. Yet the Danish authorities don't accept summons from an Ethiopian court. The same Ethiopian court who grants all the adoptions. I will show a little bit, it's about 10 minutes, I will show a little bit about that. Of course, it's a homemade video. I'm neither a journalist nor I try to be. And I just want to show a little bit what happened and what happened thereafter, because thereafter I went to Ethiopia and tried to figure out why are these summons not delivered? Why do the authorities, or where is the communication between the authorities not working? I show this video. I will try to speak a little bit and give an explanation, because it's not a professional video story or something. Yeah. It was a whole day of phone calls and waiting for phone calls, and just waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping. So then I went back to Ethiopia and actually tried with Janet and our caseworker to fix the issue, to try to find a way to make this all possible. But here we're in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they allowed us to film. We were trying. Where got the communication stuck?
Ministry of
Women and Children's Affairs, Youth and Children's Affairs this morning. And this Yayesh Tesfamni, who is the director, was there, but she pretended not to have time, or I even called her on her mobile. I could see her picking up, I could see me seeing me, and then she said, "Oh, I can't hear you," and she hung up. And thereafter we went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they said they received a letter from the ambassador in Stockholm, and they sent it to Yayesh Tesfamuni, to the director, and that we would need to speak to Yayesh first before actually going to meet the ambassador there at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we are sent back and forth.
The case hasn't had the proper legal support, and also the birth mother's case, and also about the summoning, that the fact that the adoptive parents cancelled the trip has had a really big effect on Tigist, and even hurted her psychologically. And these people's doing collides with our convention, with every convention, and also Ethiopian law.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and we want the embassy to take this into consideration. And we want the embassy to take every diplomatic step so that the girl will be okay, and that it will continue following her, and also for the court decision and summoning to be respected. And we want the embassy to make sure that happens.
The amount of support and the amount of concern for Masho and Tigist in Ethiopia is huge. But somewhere it's all blocked. And it's totally stuck right now. And I think I'm running out of time.
Thank you, both of you, for very interesting topics that you brought up. I have a few questions to start up with. And one of the things that I found was very interesting was something you said, Stine, about you can regard transnational adoption as a little bit like a marriage. But this marriage here, transnational adoption, consists of 3 parts: 2 adoptive parents and a child. And one of the things that I find interesting is that in a marriage you can get a divorce. And that divorce you can get by where only one part say, I want a divorce. But that is not the case in transnational adoption. And actually, if anybody seeks to try to annul the adoption and one of the parents are deceased, it is actually not legally possible to annul the adoption because it claims both of the adoptive parents' signature, for example. So how do you see that according to the rights of the child or the rights of the human being?
Just a legal relationship between a child and a parent is a lifelong relationship. And that is in comparison to the marriage between two adult people that can be disclosed at any time on the wish from only one of the parties. And I think I put a question to that. Why can't a child and a legal parent, even if it should be on a biological level, but the legal relationship between a child and a parent, in my opinion, should be able to be ended in the same way as a marriage. Yes? And actually, if it is the legal recognition of a parenthood that is between, if it's not an adoption, but it is what you can see a more normal registration of a legal parenthood, then it is a lifelong. You can't get rid of each other. But actually in the adoption agreement, there is, at least in Danish law, under certain circumstances, the possibility to end an adoption contract, which is not possible when you talk the normal registration of a parenthood. So, but I find that very interesting, in particular from a child right perspective. And that has to do with the fact, which I also said before, we cannot think about children without being in a legal relationship with their parents. 100 years ago, we couldn't think of women being outside a marriage, but we can think of that today. But and I think perhaps we could use that analogy to also think about in children.
Before, when Stine and Arun were answering the question, I actually also felt they disagreed, because Arun, is that right? Yeah. I felt he said the parents have an obligation, where I felt like Stine was saying the child needs to be cared for and it doesn't have to be with parents. And then I have another question. I was talking to people from Adoptionskonferencen, and I asked them, did you invite any politicians today? Because there's a new law being made about adoption. And she said, Metta, yes, but they didn't show up. And I'm just thinking, yes, politicians have their own agenda, and it might not be the agenda of the adoptees. But I'm thinking to come to a solution, or what you are fighting for. Does this mean we actually need people like you being politicians?
My God, no.
No, I mean, if I want to be a politician, I would not do this work. I would do something else. So I do influence politics, I know that, but I don't consider I think it's an issue which is too much politicized, which shouldn't be. For example, if you read this book, Romania for Export, it's actually a total technical issue which has been completely politicized. And that's the problem. The first question, I didn't really understand what you. No, I don't. I actually didn't feel that we disagree, because if I'm not wrong, I mean, of course, being a parent means an obligation, but it's also, of course, I also recognize that some parents really don't meet their obligations, and then I fully agree. Then the child has to be cared for somehow else, obviously, and there are many forms. I fully agree. It doesn't have to be adoption. Do you agree with me? Or?
Yes, it doesn't have to be by way of adoption, but it doesn't have to be by way of parenting.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning ready for a new life, feeling so lonely, but turning on my inner light, looking for adventure. Life is so overwhelming, growing every moment, where the past doesn't mean a thing. And I know I must be strong. I don't know where this ends, but this is me. I'm breaking free. Here I am, breaking free. Hey, hey.
We have, of course, cases of child trafficking, falsified papers and information that are wrong. We have heard from Ethiopian adoptees that they are actually instructed in giving a younger age than they actually are. And in all these cases, are there within the international law ways of making someone responsible for all this fraud and the false information that are given up? Who can you make responsible when maybe 15, 20 years later a person wants to invest his or her adoptive story?
Well, that's a good question, actually. I would go for the Danish government or the Danish state, in a sense that kind of validates the information which form the basis for an adoption.
May I answer?
Yes, perhaps you're better for that.
That is no. I mean, there are two things. Again, we have this. I mean, there are two things when you say responsible, how you can hold somebody responsible. You're talking about crime, so that's criminal law. Criminal law has a limit of statute. So, to bring a case, even so many years later, may be thrown out of court. And the end result is, somebody going to jail in criminal law. We are working on cases of clear-cut kidnapped children from India. They have been sent to Australia and to the United States. Even the investigation is next to impossible because of missing international agreements. So, for example, if we talk about that Indian case, Ramesh Kulkarni, and Preet Mandir, I have described it here, we have brought the criminal case in India and we have initiate a huge investigation, but the investigation doesn't extend to Denmark. It would have been for the politicians in Denmark and the authorities in Denmark to actually open up a criminal investigation in Denmark. We have tried this in the Netherlands, the same thing. We took the family and went to the police station, but the Dutch police just refused to start investigating. They could have. They don't need to, because you have to start the investigation where the crime happens. If your car is stolen in India and brought to Denmark, you have to lodge the police complaint at the police station, and from there the investigation is to take. The other way of holding somebody responsible, and that's what I spoke yesterday about, is to ask compensation for damages. It's money that you can actually ask. But I do see that, in Australia this happens, with the forced adoption, then an apology was given and some money for post-adoption. That gets in sort of political. It's very difficult under law. In Ireland, people are doing this, groups are doing this. In Canada, mothers are doing this. So it's fighting for justice and some kind of compensation, which is very difficult.
But not impossible. I mean, we see more and more that compensation cases are being brought against the authorities. We see it also within the social welfare system when children have been abused by their parents. It has two legal tracks. One, so to speak, there is the criminal case. We don't talk about that, and then there is the neglect case. And that is what you are talking about. We see them more and more, and I think it's a trend. You can get support for this way of arguing from again, I think, the European Court of Human Rights and the Convention. And we see those compensation cases also in Norway, actually. I think they are a bit far ahead from us in Denmark with that line of argumentation. But yes, as a compensation case, yes.
So if there's a lawyer in the room, I think APF would be very interested in continuing a discussion about this. And with these words, I would like to end and conclude this panel discussion. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much to Stine and Arun for the knowledge, sharing the knowledge. As adoptees, we have a voice, we have raised it. We are very, very pleased that you listened and you went into a dialogue with us. The discussion will continue. Our rights, our fight for having our basic human rights will continue. And please support our work. Please go into dialogue with us. We are more than willing to discuss, to talk, and to come out and educate, as Metta says. But thank you so much. Please give an applause to Stine and Arun for being here.
I wanna take you home.